Well, it is evident that workspaces are clearly evolving. We are seeing newer technologies and behaviors enter our organizations. The change, of course, is being fueled by a whole host of factors, from consumers to, of course, a very young workforce. And all are at play in changing the workplaces faster than ever. So through our first panel of the day, we try and understand the new workspaces of the 21st century India. And for that, I have a very eminent panel. Can I please invite Ms. Rajkamal Vempati, CHRO of Axis Bank, Mr. Amit Prakash, Executive Vice President and Head HR of Marico, Mr. S.V. Nathan, Group HR Head Deloitte, Mr. Luna Mohanty, Vice President HR Farm Equipment Sector, Mahindra & Mahindra, and Mr. Abhinav Chopra, the Chief Human Resource Officer of Viacom18, and Mr. Prakash Rao, founding member of People Strong. Such big panels are very intimidating. I mean, we have so many of us, and to make sure that we get a perspective from each one of them, I think should be very, very interesting. So let me begin by asking all of you, maybe to within a minute or so, to talk about the new workspace, because you've all seen workspaces evolve over decades. So how different is the workspace now? If you could just quickly start, let's begin from you.
So let me kind of put this in perspective. If you remember 1990s when Monica Seles kind of won the French Open, I mean, there were a lot of good things written about her, but there were a lot of negative things also got written about she being a grunting pig. Come down.
Let me just ask you to hold that thought. There's a problem. We can't hear him very clearly.
The problem? Is it okay now?
That's better.
Okay. So I was talking about Monica Seles when she won the French Open. I mean, there were a lot of positive things that got written about her and a lot of negatives of her being a grunting.
Okay.
Come now, you see that it's almost all the top 5 or 7 are big-time grunters. What's the relevance for us? I think 10 years back, this whole millennials were only around 10-15% in the population, and for us, now they are 65%, which means I think that they are the new norm. So in our organization, around 3 years back, we decided, rather than trying to find out the differences, let's look at what the similarities that they have with the earlier generations and kind of migrate to adopting the new norm. So that's how our place has changed.
Okay. Raj?
One point is very clear that all of us, if you look at corporations in India, would have hired a whole lot of millennials. In financial services, I can make a bet, like if I were to use our data, 80 to 85% would be millennials. There are differences and there are no differences with previous generations. One of the things, if I were to look at, let's begin with the entire concept of work. Work is a relic of industrial era. Even the concept of the cubicles and how the workspaces is designed is coming from the factory setup. Those have given way to open spaces, more collaborative spaces, because yes, disruption is out there and it's a new norm and nobody has the answers, and the only way that you can deal with it and make the organizations agile is collaboration. Having said that, even though there are open workspaces, etc., but the concept of work really fundamentally in Indian organization, most of us haven't changed. It is still 9 to 5, very regulated, even though you may talk about flexibility and so on and so forth. And we will delve into that. In terms of the fundamental differences, I think what people seek right now, what they give importance to is a little different, the younger ones. They seek experiences, and we can talk about it more. But if I were to...
Raj, who are the young ones? Just define that also.
Sorry?
Who are the young ones? You said the young ones are seeking experiences.
Yes.
Who is young in, say, the...
Younger ones, when I say millennials, say anything, anybody less than 30, 32.
Less than 32. Okay.
Less than 32. They would seek experiences. If the old contract was about saying that you need to have certain life stage related compensation programs, say, loan program because they want to own houses and cars and all of that, I think that has been renegotiated, and most of them in fact come back and ask me, I want to take 5 holidays a year. Tell me how is that possible, because those are experiences I value. And it's no longer so much about owning houses, owning cars as much. But fundamentally, if you go down and slice it across India, because I hire 40 to 50% of my people in tier 3, tier unbanked locations and rural. There, has it changed? I'm not sure. I don't think it's changed. The concept of millennials perhaps is very urban, very metro-centric. People who've been part of the entire technological journey right from maybe a couple of generations. When you look at the rural and the unbanked population, their needs and their aspirations still remain same about security, safety. So yes, there are differences, but
Also
I don't know
similarities.
whether I can paint them in the same brush.
Okay. Amit, we keep talking about changing workspaces. Do you think the change has been much more, in your face or much faster in the last few years than it had, than the change that we witnessed, say, through the 90s or the early 2000s?
Sure. So I'll try and bring in a different perspective on this. And see, there's no point contesting the change, because the change is there and it's in front of you. But there's a social context to it. The social context is that the way that we educate our kids, the way that the younger ones are getting into the society, the exposures that they have is extremely different. Their orientation itself is very different. I'll take an example. So the way that we were taught was very, very instructional. Our teachers were on the board teaching us. We had homeworks, we had to come back, give it back, and that's all, done. You go through an exam and you're through. Today there's a concept which is known as flipped learning. And they're getting exposed right from the, let's say, the KG and the class ones, okay? Which essentially means that the teachers don't teach them. They tell them, you go, you explore. You look at a YouTube, you read yourself, you write down your questions, okay? Before even you come and question the teacher, you firstly discuss with your friends, yeah? And then the group comes and discusses in a larger group. Now let's just bring it back to the workplace, okay? And if these are the people who have been brought in after their education, formal education, and the entire exposure has been different, their basic approach to work is questioning. Don't direct me, involve me,
Sure.
okay? Let me collaborate, because that's their basic nature of upbringing, okay? They don't look at leaders as hierarchy. They look at leaders, people who can add value to them, okay? So hierarchy in a position doesn't make a difference to the newer generation. What makes a difference is who's adding value to me. Where can I go and seek more learning? Now, as an organization, we need to be continuously aware and agile about such changes and keep on changing our approach.
How do you do that?
So in terms of, let's say in a Marico kind of a space, we have been pretty up with it. So in 2012 itself, I'll just take one example. We changed our entire campus program, wherein we started attracting our talent by social connect and by defining the core purpose of what is it that they want to do in their life. So our campus program is all connected with exposures and not with, let's say, projects or competitions that we run. We actually go to the campuses and we say that, would you want to take an experience with an entrepreneur or a social system wherein they have challenges in terms of running their own business, and we would want to compete across different campuses to find solutions to that, okay? We have had a huge response, and the kind of attraction that we get through the millennials in terms of purposeful work is huge. And we have been changing our different processes or the way that we work across to keep in tune with the current generation.
Okay. Mr. Nathan, of course, you represent an industry which requires a lot of travel, erratic work hours. Do you see any difference in the way consulting and, Deloitte in terms of the way they're approaching and getting all three groups to work together? What is a new workspace according to you?
First of all, that's a very, very good question, because we are absolutely in the thick of trying to find some solutions to that. For instance, earlier it was fashionable to say I worked from, let's say, 7 in the morning right up till about 12 at night, and and boasting to all your co-workers that this is how hard you worked. Or when your partner thinks that you worked so hard, then that must go up in your reviews and so on. But today, what has changed is this thing that you have in your pocket. And I'm sure that some of you would have this in your hands. That has changed. Because you now work 24/7. If you're going to be working all the time, I mean, you have mails that come in any time of the day or night. And we are so addicted to it. So whether you're on social media or whether you're on a mail, you still have to respond. And clients are demanding. They don't care whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday for you. So how do you respond? And in such a context, it's not the right thing for us to say, okay, I need you to come to work. This is exactly where I'm going to tie you down for so many hours. So we said, why don't we experiment with flexibility? So we brought in something called flexible work hours. So you work wherever you want, howsoever long that you want, as long as you get stuff done. That's what is being expected. So we are seeing few things that are happening. One is the work itself is changing, the kind of work that people do. The workforce is changing, and I mean, we have about 85% of our people are millennials, very, very young people. This whole disintermediation that I keep talking about is they don't care whether you're a partner, a senior partner, or a person who's come in the day before. For them, everything, it's not a hierarchy, but this is a hierarchy in some sense of knowledge. So if there is somebody who's a little more knowledgeable, they'll rush. So things like crowdsourcing, which nobody even thought of before. It's perfectly okay to say, I don't know.
Right.
These are the things that help us formulate those kinds of policies which say, okay, do whatever you think is right. So we are doing things like make sure that it makes it easy on people, like flexible work. We are now doing a lot of work with women. And I might as well be boastful to say we are one of the best places for working women. If there is a woman, for instance, if there's a woman who is in the family way, we make sure that, of course, we got a separate program called DMOM for Deloitte mothers. What we do is, in the third trimester, we will say, we will make sure that wherever you go, please use a transport and we will pay for it. And so there are a number of programs that we bring in, knowing that these are the new asks of people that work in our firm. So lots of things are changing. A policy that held good about 2 years ago will not hold good anymore.
Really? Okay.
We keep evaluating the policies all the time. We ask ourselves, if this doesn't make any sense, should we be looking at it? So it's not like an annual review or an audit of what we're doing. We audit our policies and say, for relevance, for usage, it's nice to have some policies, but if they're not being used, junk it and let's get into something which is a little more meaningful.
Oh, that's interesting. Abhinav, media is again a very complicated industry. I mean, it's constantly changing, and you've got a whole host of young people and you've experienced people working together. How do you define the new workspace in the media industry?
I think I think first let me step back and just look at the context really and the environment. I think what's really changing for us around is one, the way technology and the world of convergence is really really blurring the spaces between what's a media versus what's a technology conversation. Today, as we speak as Viacom, we are hiring engineers, which a couple of years ago you would never think that I'll be talking about hiring of engineers within the city. So there is this whole blurring of lines between what the technology world is really and convergence is being. Now, where do you view yourself? Is the TV a platform? Are you about the content, or is Netflix where you want to watch it, or is and this whole convergence is really blurring the line between, is Amazon a technology company or a content company or an e-commerce organization? And that itself is that's the first change that's really happening, where blurring of lines between who's forward integrating versus who's backward integrating, and that's the first thing that's really happening.
I think the other thing that's happening is more from a resource standpoint is I think the world has moved from a world of from a scarcity to a world of abundance. And the business models of today are changing from scarcity to abundance, where therefore the logic of the past does not really apply, be it energy as a sector, be it some of the other sectors. It just, there is the earlier resource model of constraints, and therefore is moving to abundance, and which is also visible in the way I think some resources are available, which is reflects in the behaviors of the youngsters. There is abundance of choices. There's abundance of career choices. There's abundance of opportunity. Of course, technology has played a role in bringing it together and serving it to you, but that abundance creates a very different mindset. Growing up, I knew I had to compete, even get into a school. That's not the case as much today for a lot of kids. The opportunities are huge. You don't think twice before saying, okay, this is not what I want to do, maybe I'll go try something else. And that abundance is not just in businesses, but in choices and opportunities right across. That's the second thing. I think the third thing that's really influencing everything, it's not that change has not been there. I think it's the delta on change. Moore's law at its best today. The speed at which the change is happening is what we are looking at coping up with. And that itself has its own set of issues. And this itself causes a lot of change, not just in the way we work, but also in our behaviors. I mean, if you watch Netflix, Black Mirror, if you catch Black Mirror and you see how human behavior combined with technology is giving birth to a completely new way of looking at things, a completely new lens. And this, therefore, is making a lot of difference, I think, overall, not just in media, but the way we look at our businesses, to me, these three things. And as a result, I think for us, it is just an outcome, and therefore, like Amit said, I mean, change is here to stay. Embrace it, do what you need to do with it, and it is only going to speed up. The process is only going to speed up. Yeah, and therefore, see how you want to therefore change your policies. Incidentally, we as an organization, as MTV, we study kids in India and what do they want. And we talked about 11,000 kids across 50 cities last year. And what are their attributes? What do they want? And some of the things that are really changing. I'll give you one example. And you growing up, you had to be perfect. You had to be nice.
Right.
But perfection is passé now. Today the word that the kids are using is flawsome. I'm awesome with all my flaws. And I will wear myself as a badge. My scars are my tattoos. And being yourself is about the new mantra of being who you are. And this is a completely different way of looking at things from what we could have seen earlier. So and that obviously has its implications on. So this whole spectrum from the environment, the context, the business, the behaviors, and therefore the organization. That entire spectrum is kind of changing, and the delta on this change is what is, is what is really important for us to watch out for.
Okay, can we increase the volume of these mics? Because I think there's some mics that the audio is not very clear. Okay, Prakash, your thoughts on this?
So I think so. In PeopleStrong, almost 90% of our workforce are millennials, right? And we serve around 120 customers. We're around 10 lakh employees of our customers. There we see a workforce where around 45% are still Gen Y and Gen X. So I have a lot of millennials who are working with Gen X and Gen Y. So the kind of challenges we face is very different. So how can we ensure that the generation that we're working with, they're able to work with people? And when we started off around 10 years back, we felt this is going to be a big challenge. But then we realized that we're somewhere trying to typecast the generation gap and making it an issue. And we realized over a point of time that it's not an issue. And I'll tell you why. Because the future of work is changing every second. I think like what everybody's been talking about for the last 15 minutes, the future of work is changing at such a fast pace. Tomorrow we're talking about gig economy, where there's not going to be any employment. It's just going to be anytime, anywhere work, right? So what's going to happen for generations? How will each of these people adapt to that is the question. That's number one. The future of work, when it's changing, how are people going to adapt to that? The second thing is that even in organizations these days, people are talking about hierarchies getting collapsed, right? So in PeopleStrong, we've introduced something called as 3 degrees of separation to the customer, not have large hierarchies. So if somebody is overseer, then that person is an overhead. So no hierarchies, concept of boss is getting done away with. That's the second point. The third most important point is, I think whoever is the employee that you're working with, whatever is the age or the generation they come with, whatever are the values or the drivers that they come with, how can you provide them a platform where they have an equal opportunity to express themselves, to express their views, and to be their own individuals? That's the biggest question that most of the corporates, most of the organizations, including PeopleStrong, are facing. How do we enable that? That's the toughest question. So one of the things that you have to do is, because we're in the HR technology space, traditional ERPs over a period of time in their constant avatar might not survive. So what we're seeing is a lot of SaaS players, a lot of competition coming together to create a unique marketplace for an employee where he can do whatever he wants. From salary to soul, right? Can you provide everything to an employee in one unique marketplace? So irrespective of what generation I come from, what values I have, I'm able to benefit and I'm able to relate to the organization that I'm working with. That's the biggest question. So how do you enable that is what people have to work on. Okay. Rather than typecasting, how will people react? You create the opportunity, they will react and they will skill themselves on their own to be able to adapt to that situation.
Okay. So as hierarchies flatten out, how do you manage compensations? Because I think that's a tricky question, right? A lot of millennials perhaps are making more than Gen-Xers or Gen Y. So how do you manage that? How do you decide compensation? How do you manage that dynamic at the workplace? Whoever wants to take this question.
I think before jumping on, just to look at compensation as the only pivotal point of rewards proposition, I think the point I guess all of us are echoing, and at least what I've seen is, as the organizations are morphing, as the organizations also changing their stance. See, earlier we were very paternalistic. You come to me, I will do everything for you. Rather than taking the stance, we are saying we are becoming equal platforms, in a sense, platform of skills. You can come here, explore, and do whatever it takes to kind of realize your potential and bring the best version of yourself and enhance your potential as well as performance. So if you look at compensation just one aspect of it. There are other intangible reward propositions as well. The community that you create, the purpose that you have, whether the person has enabling culture where the person can come in and present his or her perspective and shape the imperatives. So all of this along with the learning platform that you have, because one of the things is, and I love the topic that you have, which is rebrain or rot, because if you look at the earlier training models were about basically fixing problems of the past. Now you're saying that you not only have to learn for today, but you have to prepare yourself for tomorrow. And I guess organizations like us, we have done a huge investment in not looking at skills vertically. Because when you look at skills vertically, you are talking about maintaining status quo in a hierarchical organization and preparing person from moving from one ladder to another ladder. If I were to say that when I look at things horizontally, it's a lattice. How do you prepare people from moving from one role to another, create the depth? Because truly surely, if I look at the construct of jobs and skills, they are changing. Let's say operations, and there is concept of, you're talking about AI, doing a lot of disruption in the space. Do you need operation roles, the back-end roles? But I see the change happening, at least in the banking sector. A lot of operations roles have moved to governance roles, a lot of audit, compliance, control roles. Are you kind of preparing the people for that? And what kind of learning architectures that you have? So I think it's just it's an integrated view that you need to have. But having said that, compensation of the past, where it is all straight-jacketed, will not suffice. It's about flexibility that you need to give depending on the person's life choices. And if you expect people are into ownership, I think that's a reality that we've understood. I've never had a discussion with people, post-appraisal, people will come and, you're expecting, they will talk about, the example I gave. I have a mortgage to service or something else to happen, can you look at my compensation? This is the first time, and I've been hearing instances, I'm talking about holidays, some other experiences that they want to garner. How does the compensation structure allow that? It's not about just fixed compensation, but what kind of experiences does the organization provide? Because when people are spending time, even if they are spending flexibly, yes, we are working all the time, given the mobile devices. They are saying, they are seeking organizations as a community where they bring their whole selves. So be it hobby classes to creating self-interest groups to health groups, and all of those also become equally important.
Okay. Let me just build on what she mentioned. To me, if I see about compensation, and every one of us in this room, compensation is a lot about fairness. It's not about how much you're getting paid. Because if you're looking at what you're getting paid, you're going to be looking at your neighbor who does a similar kind of work and say, does he or she, for the similar kind of work, for the effort that I've put in, no different, is that person getting more? So compensation is a lot about fairness. Having said that, there is a new change that is occurring, which is people don't, and I think there's a new stuff that's coming in. It's not only about compensation. People are saying exposure is important. Why do people stay in organizations? If I learn, if I grow, I'm good. And third, if my compensation is in line with what the industry does, more importantly, if I manage to know, and everybody knows this, there's almost like a spreadsheet that goes around. If I know that there is a certain fairness about what has been done, at the same time, they know that, if I've done something a little bit more and I've been compensated well, reasonably well, we are kind of in the zone. So compensation really, when organizations look at compensation, they're starting to look at, beyond all of this, who are the people that we should really take care of, not really compensating them as, compensation, by the way, comes in from the word called compensate, which is, you give me something for what I have done for you. So it's almost like a quid pro quo. All of us in this room know that we give much more than what we get. So compensation is really a dirty word. So the way to do that is, if you want to feel happy with yourself, and organizations are looking at how you can improve the happiness quotient of people, don't focus only on compensation. Just make sure that the trust index on compensation rises. Because your employees, when they start to know that this is a trusting organization, and I believe them because it's meritocracy that rules, then they would go.
So I have a couple of interesting anecdotes on compensation. So what kind of compensation do new people ask these days? So one of the organizations we're hiring, a person at a chief executive level said, I'm okay to take a 30% cut, but can you give me certain bitcoins today? Oh. Or somebody else said, I'm training to climb Mount Everest. That's an experience I want to have. It costs 35 lakhs. Yeah. Can you fund that and give me 6 months of holiday? I'm ready to sign a bond for 5 years that I'll work with you. So that's how people are changing the questions they ask. It's not about money anymore. Yeah. So
that's interesting.
So just give you a little insight on, so one of the questions that we asked part of our survey with these 11,000 kids was, why do you want to work? About more than 50% people want to work in the social sector.
Social sector.
Yes, and only 18% aspire to work with MNCs. Of course, as organization, as corporates, we have a huge issue on our hand. But the whole, and this is people who are going to join the workforce soon, around Gen Z. And therefore, social sector is not what's driving compensation. And therefore, the whole focus seems to be on what is the purpose that I'm going to do, what is that purpose that I'm going to contribute towards. And therefore, how am I going to really make a difference with my life in my environment that I live in? And therefore, that sense of purpose is really driving that conversation at one end. From the current set of conversations, like everybody spoke about, I think the mindset is moving from loyalty to employability.
Sorry, loyalty to?
Employability.
Employability.
How are you going to make sure that I am employable at all points in time? Because with the rate of change that's happening around and the jobs that are changing, the construct of the skills are changing, how are you going to make sure that as an organization, I will be ahead of the curve and always have a job and learn to be able to perform on that job?
Okay.
Yeah? And that's I think really attracting people more than compensation really.
Okay, let me go back to an initial thought on, the key differences between the three categories of people that are occupying the workspace today: the Gen-Xers, the Millennials, and the Baby Boomers. What are there any key differences, or are they very similar?
So I would say that, like I said, it's just a typecast. I think there are different values each one of them have. Nathan just mentioned that, the way they look at work is different. For some people, I think for millennials, individuality is very important. For a Gen X or a Gen Y, for them, working hard, trying to prove yourself is important. For a baby boomers, because of the fact that they came out, their babies born after the wars that the world saw, they had a very different values in life. So the drivers are different. But
so what are the values for the baby boomers?
So for the baby boomers, they had a very clear value that, it is about working hard. It is about trying to prove yourself. Family is important. That's what they saw. And from a technology perspective, for them, technology is microwave. Right? That's the technology invention they saw. For a Gen X and a Gen Y, the technologies are all the touch phones, the internet is what the Gen X and Gen Y are seeing. For millennials, it's intangible. It's the Internet of Things. It doesn't even exist. It is cryptocurrency. So look at the baby boomers. They saw cash transactions being passed on. They would go withdraw cash, give it to somebody, get paid in cash. The Gen X and Gen Y moved from cash transactions to online transfers. Millennials will probably never see cash over a period of time. They will only deal in bitcoins. That might not even be a cash. Imagine you might not have banks at all with cryptocurrencies. So that's the rate at which the world is changing, and that's how the values are changing for these people as well.
Prakash, hearing you speak, I feel like a dinosaur. I mean, thinking that there'll be no cash.
No, but I have a different point of view on baby boomers and Gen X. And, there are differences and there are similarities. I won't stereotype them. But if you look at on the concept of learning, the stereotype exists that it's millennials who go out and learn on their own actively. In my context, when I see it, it is the older population, the 50 plus, who's most active, who is kind of, worried that they are getting left behind, and whatever infrastructure. So we have a huge tie-up with Coursera. They are lapping up content like never before. They have 4 courses, 5 courses, certifications, whatever we have a partnership with INSEAD. They are the first ones to enroll. We have various academies with Crystal and all. Everything that we roll out, they are the first ones to kind of lap up. In fact, it's the millennials who want us to manage their learning. And yes, they learn from their peers, but they're not learning as hard.
So you think the baby boomers are completely going out there?
If baby boomers are 50 plus,
50 plus, and the millennials need everything to be served to them on a platter.
Shweta, can I come
Yes.
in? Raj, we have a similar experience and we try to deep dive to understand why does that happen. If you look at the way in which we have been taught, if you get curated data, the baby boomers and the Gen X people tend to go and utilize that more. What happens for the millennials is they don't want curated data. They want to go and explore. And therefore, Coursera kind of thing is more attuned, we believe, for the baby boomers or for the Gen X. And the Gen Y doesn't really go in for that. They just go out and get wherever they want to get the information from. That's what our experience has been. But it's very similar to what's there.
Okay.
So I would add a few points to that. So the differences are there. Okay. The expectations are very similar. Everybody wants a work-life balance. Okay. But the intensity has increased. Just for an example, a millennial, while he was growing up, he has seen both his parents working. Okay. Has not experienced the same touch, which we have experienced. Okay. Their ask in terms of creating a work-life balance is much more intensified. Okay, because of their own experiences. Now, even I want a work-life balance, but my own understanding in terms of work is something that I need to do it because my family needs to succeed and, I need to feed the family. For them, it comes naturally to them. Okay? So they're very, very subtle differences in all our engagement conversations. Now, for example, everybody wants development. But the expectations are so varied. Okay? Wherein a millennial would say that, you know what, having a review and having a conversation doesn't help me. I need a specific conversation with my supervisor every month with respect to how am I developing myself. Am I moving forward or am I not moving forward?
Quicker feedback, instant gratification.
Not an instant, it's not about gratification. Again, it's about development. The expectation is different. Whereas a Gen X will say that, you know, one conversation in 3 to 6 months is perfectly fine for me. But then the moment that you pull out and you say that, is development important to you? Both of them will say that, yes, development is very critical for me. But the way that they look at development, it's very different. The interactions that they want is extremely different. And as Raj was saying, you know, it's the millennials want personal interactions. A Gen Xer or a baby boomer will be more than happy to get onto a computer and learn on their own. But it's exactly the reverse on the other side.
More hand-holding.
More hand-holding, more expectation that I am attached to people wherein I can go and learn. They're looking at experiences and not set roles. So those are the very subtle differences which are happening.
Perhaps also the age factor, right? Like when you're younger, that's pretty much what you try and get out of a workplace.
So actually a bit reverse, because what we expect a millennial is to be very, very computer savvy, very digital savvy, and thus go and seek learning themselves. It is a bit reverse because the Gen Xers and the baby boomers are actually taking over in terms of going and learning on their own. Maybe because of skilling factor and them realizing that I don't know as much as the newer generation. But the millennials, to be very frank, actually want one-on-one touch. They want more personal interaction.
But Amit, she may be right, because there's an age factor, right? If you look at college education, what does it do? It provides you an identity, and you come to the corporate world saying that I know everything, and I'm ready to explore. It takes a while for you to figure out, maybe you don't know as much, and there are still things to be.
No, so for instance, when I was probably at that age, when I joined the workforce, I was clear I knew nothing. And I wanted to learn everything possible, and that's the attitude I went with.
I think some of it is also happening because one key difference that I see between the generation now and the earlier ones is linear versus multidimensional. The generation is fairly plural in their approach. I can be an accountant or a finance professional in the day. I can be a radio jockey or a DJ at night. I can be a diver, and I can be a professional diver, and I can also be an executive in a corporation and contribute to the society through what I do on the weekends. So lives and careers, two things are happening. One, they're becoming multi-dimensional as compared to being linear for another generation. So I want to do a lot more with what I have, and I'm a lot more than just my job. My job is not what only defines me. My personality and everything else that defines me that I do outside of job. In fact, many times, I have so many guys in the organization who, I have a person in sales who's also who's a DJ by night, who's actually going and DJing in some famous clubs. Someone who's an on-air personality and also is a producer inside the organization. And there are these multiple facets. And if you ask them, why do you do that, the motivation is also very different, which is they find energy in that. And there's somewhat of a symbiotic relationship of energy rub-off between when I do this in the day, I do that at night, and I don't mind working hard and working long. So, there's this whole perception about baby boomers being a little, millennials being a little frivolous, don't know what they want. Actually, I think personally the reverse is quite true.
Okay.
They
Mr.
have a very strong
would you like to
opinion.
come in here?
I think each generation thinks that it is smarter than the past and it's going to be better than the future. So, by the way, I didn't say this. George Orwell said this years ago. I completely subscribe to this. So when we were young, we thought that our boss was not half as smart as we were.
Yes.
And I don't think that's going to change. But I do see a few things that are different from the kinds of, the journey that I've been through. For one, the aspirational quotient, no different. But there's something which is very different. It's in the space of learning. If you look at learning, earlier, all of us were drilled about this whole thing of learning, because learning is something which is very valuable. So the value of learning was drilled into us. But if you look at the new generation this is the value of learning to the learning of value. Give me something that will be valuable to me in the future. So that's a very big distinction. The other one that I see is, we used to be really worried every time there's an annual appraisal of what we would be told. The younger folks, they want a performance appraisal. They want to do this on an almost continuous basis. So in fact, we changed our entire performance management system. So we don't really have something called a bell curve. All this is completely gone. People want feedback. Our younger generations, they are not looking at experience as the only driver or education as the only driver. They're looking at two other systems. One is exposure. Expose me to something which is new. It could be a different kind of a role. So that's one. The other one is the broader ecosystem. You tell me, what does this firm really stand for? The purpose, something that you alluded to. What's the purpose of your organization? Tell me what's happening there. If you say that they are a lot into things like, being healthy. So if in the cafeteria, if you really had those good old samosas, kachoris, then you will find that people will blanch at things like that. You will find them more moving towards, hey, do you have a certain more nutritional stuff? Then they will start to think, well, you're really addressing some of the key. You're living what you're talking about. If wellness is one thing that you're talking about in your firm, is it consistent right through? They're very perceptive. And the one that I find very gratifying for me is they are fearless. They would come and tell you to your face that this is something that you ought not to be doing. And to that extent, it's a lot more energizing for an organization to know that it is off course. It doesn't have to wait to slam into something to know that there is something that has happened in an organization. So our young people, they would walk into rooms, and today we are having to even redesign our spaces. For example, my office, I had an opportunity to do it recently. I removed my table. Because if there's a table between you and the person sitting in front of you, there's already a divide. So you will find that there are no tables anymore. You have whatever that you want, you can do on the sides, and then there are only conversation spaces. So there are lots of things.
But doesn't that make it very loud? These open workspaces, I just think they're so distracting and you're unable to do any serious work. We have an open workspace too, and I can't get any serious writing done in office. It's impossible.
So, it all depends on each one of us. For me, you can put me in the thick of places. If I have to get something done, I will be completely obvious. I'll be deaf to the world and the noise around me. I'm not saying that everybody has got to be that way, but I think the open spaces, it's not about the noise or stuff around that. It's about the openness of collaboration. Today, if you look at people, they would not even think twice. They would send it off. Sometimes we have to issue some kind of a diktat to say, be careful about how you use your collaboration tools, because it should not go outside. They would not hesitate. If they didn't know anything, they'd put it out and say, hey, would you know something about this?
Right.
So open spaces are good.
But yeah, so it's obviously a cultural shift when you decide to go on to an open workspace. So isn't it important also to sensitize employees on how do you work in an open workspace?
Can I bring in another point there?
Yeah.
So actually we transited from closed working spaces or cabins, cubicles to open working spaces, and now the workspaces are moving towards a very different system and arrangement. Okay. So there are a lot of research which has happened in terms of, is it important for organizations to look at the kind of profile of people that you have and arrange your workspaces accordingly? So have cubicles, have cabins, have secluded workplaces, have open workspaces, and don't assign work seats. Okay? So if I choose to work, assume that I have a task wherein I need to focus, and I need to work one-on-one. I should have the flexibility of getting into a room and just doing it. Okay? Versus if I have a requirement of getting together with 5 people, I should be able to do it. Okay? And my workspace should be flexible and agile enough to allow me to do that. So somewhere the workspace will also take a very different shape, which will be more dependent on the nature of work that you're supposed to do and the kind of people personalities that you're running with.
Right.
But I think fundamentally, because we've run this experiment, so we are a bank, although you said we will be out of business in some time, I still think there will be, we will morph, and for that we are also, like a lot of all other organizations, we have a digital team, yes, because mobility is such a big thrust area. For the mobile team and the digital team, we used to have spaces constructed like ourselves. Did it work? We said, okay, why do they have hierarchies? Why do they have all those things? They can't really think digital if we are kind of making them hardbound in spaces like ourselves. So we kind of push them to a different space. And we call them, they were all part of squads. They didn't have like departments and silos. They were all part of squads and tribes, and that's an experiment we ran. If the fundamental pivot of the organization continues to be the manager, and if the person says, manager is the karta dharta for me, the squads weren't working as much. So you talked about sensitization. Where the pivot needs to move is from the manager to self. The hierarchies still have reliance on the manager and the the various layers to it. The minute we kind of said it's you, your appraisal is your responsibility, not the manager's, that's when we started seeing the squads work a bit. But it's progress. It's a journey in progress. It's work in progress. But the noise factor, actually, it's been quite enriching. The team tells me that work gets done faster.
So I have one point on this, on the open workspace. I think we have open workspace in PeopleStrong as well. I think it comes from a sense of entitlement. Sometimes what happens is, whether the person accepts it or doesn't accept it. One is the factor, like you said, how much does it give me the peace of mind to work? So we have people who want certain kind of music to be played in the office, which helps them to relax at work, while some of them might not like it. So when I talk about sense of entitlement, there's a certain generation who felt the moment you get into a cabin, there's a sense of entitlement. You get a corner office, there's a certain amount of achievement you derived out of that, right? But the new generation doesn't derive, for them, the entitlement is more within. It doesn't come from having my own space where I can sit and work. So that's the reason why organizations these days are moving to an open workspace, because they want to give people an opportunity to be their own self in wherever they are, in whatever space they can find. It can be in a huge cabin, it can be right across a person who's joined new, you might be the CEO. So can you sit across the person and feel your own self and still work? So they get entitlement out of that. So it's about how do you make a person feel comfortable and still give them the entitlement. But there are certain generations who feel lost out in this. So we had this interesting conversation where one of our chief executives, Shelly, and she was like, this open, when you hang to do meetings and you have to have some confidential information, what do you do? How do you discuss that? We're having this discussion. So we did a focus group, we're talking to people. One of them said, what's confidential? He's like, if there are 3 people, more than 2 people in that room, then everybody knows about it. So you might have as well do it in an open forum, it doesn't matter as it is. So that's how the new generation thinks, and that's how they look at openness in a very different manner. So that's why I think this open culture has come into being these days.
Okay.
Shweta, can I come on the open spaces? Actually, we had a very interesting incident. We decided to give our design studio an opportunity to create their own space, and we thought but we had a fear in our heart, saying that they may come out with something very crazy, or they may absolutely have no cabins. We were actually surprised. They actually carved out places for themselves. They wanted to have their own individual spaces, not saying that, okay, we'll be absolutely open in our setup. We thought they were going to bring in a lot of bean bags, and even they might put a bed to sleep there, but no. They looked at more ergonomically designed chairs for them. So they're absolutely, our way of interpreting or stereotyping, saying that, no, they will be very different, as our experiments haven't gone on to prove, has gone to prove us wrong, actually, and they're absolutely more...
Can I give you an incident that happened about almost a couple of years ago? I introduced something just on a whim. I said, by the way, millennials are a lot into recognition. recognition for them, public recognition of any sort, very, very important. So they grow up on a huge, so we have different opportunities for them to be recognized. I thought it would be a good idea if I could, for one of our top performers, for some reason, if we want to recognize a person, they could have my cabin for a whole day. And I would sit at their workspace, wherever that is, and I would spend that whole day there, and they could use my office. And I thought that that would be a fantastic thing. By the way, it worked really well for the first half of the day. Yeah. The second half of the day, the person comes running to me and says, I think it's a little overbearing for me. I would rather sit here. And curiously, I was loving that space which was outside because I had a lot of people who were around. There was a lot of interaction that happened. And now I'm beginning to think that maybe these cabins ought to go someplace. We really need to have conversation spaces. We don't really need to have cabins. And this whole thing about confidentiality today, if you're working in a paperless office, if you're looking at what is confidential anymore. So even if you take some of those aside, I just think this whole notion of an open workspace has got new definitions today.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to open the floor for questions now because we have an interesting audience, again, across 3 generations. So any questions from the audience? Please introduce yourself. Mr. Bajaj right there.
Thank you. I think the most important question is what was mentioned, that there will be 1 million, I would say, livelihoods or jobs, you can say, per month, which will be coming out. How do we take care? I can only say from my experience. Can you hear me?
Not very clearly.
I can shout, but can you hear me now?
That's better. Yes. Okay. Can we have the audio up for his mic, please?
Yeah, please shake your hand if you can't hear me. It's very important that with all the startups, with all the entrepreneurship, etc., with all the made in India, manufacture in India, all that will not take care of 1 million jobs per month. I can tell you that. And we have seen that. We've seen the past record, and we have to think out of the box. And one of my suggestions, you people may, and I'd like to know what are the other out of the box things to make sure that 1 million gets employed. Otherwise, they will be vulnerable to anti-social elements. They'll be joining, if I may say, terrorist organizations. What else to do? Now, I have heard that countries like Japan and the countries which are getting older people need jobs from youth. 100 million jobs are waiting in Japan in the next few years. Now, what we can do is have a collaboration. I'm giving Japan as an example. There are many countries which are like that, where we say that what are the skills required, get trainers here, train our people, visas will be given. That will not be a problem because they need them. It's a win-win situation for both sides. And make a grand plan to see that all 1 million per month, month to month, and there's a big backlog, is employed. That's the most important question.
That's a very important question actually, because there are jobs, there's a crisis actually. So are organizations thinking on those lines?
So one of the things that we did, and it also kind of broke some myths for me. So we, across I think 1,000 campuses last year, across various pin codes, and I'm talking about pin codes because we really went to rural India as well. We ran a campaign on future of jobs. Around 23,000 people participated. So that was heartening. But I thought when you look at future of jobs, the idea was to see what are the concepts that are giving, how is the youth across sections of society, across various disciplines, lawyers, medical grads, doctorates, what are they saying? What we were heartened, and I was personally heartened to look at the top 5 ideas. They are looking at problems to solve at the local level and looking at a lot more ideas to foster entrepreneurship. And we were very, very heartened because they are looking at the problems across there. Somebody had a farming problem, so they said, okay, can we have Uber of tractors? There were PhD doctorate students from here who talked about putting, creating another industry in color pigmentation. Yes, it's a need. So I think the reason we kind of went and did this campaign was saying that how can a bank participate and foster these entrepreneurs and create an ecosystem? Because it'll be many, many micro entrepreneurs who, if they come together, will help provide some solution to the looming problem. Collaborations are key. I agree with Mr. Bajaj. Be it academia, be it industry coming together, and government. So we had Niti Aayog participating with us, and what we are doing personally is we have also an incubator, Thought Factory. We are incubating all these entrepreneurs, funding them. And they may not generate 20,000 jobs at the first go, but idea is everybody in their local communities, if they are able to at least give jobs to 10, 20, 25 people, I guess we will be able to get some actionable solutions.
If I was to really stretch the envelope on that slightly, and one is of course in the near future, 5 to 10 years, and this is my take on this, I think we will have to somehow, the world will have to stop chasing the creation of jobs, and concepts of universal minimum income, being paid not to do a job, in times to come is something that will become a reality. And this is not about the next 5 years or 10 years. But if you just stretch the envelopes and look at what's really happening with the jobs, with the advent of technology coming into just about most of the things that we are doing. Yeah. And therefore, so we'll need to really reimagine the world the way it is today, and not necessarily, the progression is not going to be linear. We will have to really think exponential, and therefore the solutions will have to be exponential for a slightly longish period of time. Yes, in the short run, which is what, 5 years, 10 years, yes, I think jobs will have to be, as we spoke about, will have to be created that way. But on the long run, you will have to look at concepts like minimum universal income coming into play.
So I think one of the most important things here is skilling, because even though the national skilling NSDC is these days trying to do a lot in the areas of skilling, but the problem is they're still not skilling people for the new kind of jobs that are getting created in the market. So we're in the recruitment space. We work with a lot of organizations, Mahindra is there, Access here, we work with them, we're recruiting for them. There are a lot of people that organizations still require, and they take time to hire those people as well. Why is there that gap? That's because there's not enough people skilled enough to pick up the job at the right time. So if the government can invest in skilling to help our people get skilled in the new kind of jobs that will get created, that's the best thing. That's number one. Number two is that the organized workforce sector in India, after demonetization, at least that organized workforce sector from around 9% has come to around 14-15%. But that's it. The entire workforce that works, only 14% is organized. So a lot of people who are working... Are
you saying after demonetization from 9% it's gone up to 14%?
It's gone up to just 14%.
What data are you quoting here?
This is the government this is the data from PF. So any person who gets into an organized sector, there's a PF code that you need to create for that person, because every person who works, that has to get deducted. It's coming from that data. Now if that's happening, but that's still not enough. So because the ones who are working in organized sector, unorganized sector, they have a danger of losing their jobs overnight without anything in their hand. And that's when it becomes a problem. And like rightly Sir said, they're the ones who get attracted towards unsocial elements. Right. So can we push the unorganized sector to move towards organized sector? Can we create some economic swaps for them to get into the organized sector? That's one. Second is, can we skill people for the new kind of jobs that will come tomorrow? Rather than skilling them for the jobs that were there 2 days or two years ago, is the big two things that the government will have to do.
Okay. But I guess there the corporates have to step in, pushing the problem and saying the education system's broken and, we're not getting enough skilled people. This is the same lament that we've been having for 10 years or...
Absolutely.
So we've got to step in and do our bit.
So are you all hiring aggressively, or have hiring plans been put on hold until the economy picks up?
Pretty aggressive.
We are hiring as per plan. There are no changes. But I think the point that Mr. Bajaj talked about is, All of us coming together will only attribute to some percentage of job creation in the formal sector. What we need to do, which is where I'm actually gung-ho on the micro-entrepreneurs part. Trying to create micro-entrepreneurs across the country will be another solution, rather than just looking at the construct of a job and security
Sure, absolutely.
So two things to this question. One is the skill, Mr. Bajaj. So what we try and do is we are trying to partner with the local institutes to make the skills very specific to what we require in our organization, so that we can actually go and hire. So we are starting there as a partner. The other piece is more into the creation. So what we are trying to do is the two organizations which is there with Marico, which is Marico Innovation Foundation and Accent, wherein we work with the entrepreneurs wherein they are not able to scale the business beyond a particular point of time. And we have a lot of senior leaders in the organization who would love to be a part of such an entrepreneurial system and help them debottleneck the entire operation, and thus create more opportunities. And we are very, very actively working with around 100 odd such organizations to ensure that they go to the next level of the scale and become a very large organization. Sorry? As corporate mentors, and they work with us for 2 years, and then they come out of it.
Okay.
I can just add this, that first of all, a question that I can respond to, I'll say it's a very good question. A question that I'm not very sure that I can give you something, I would say is an outstanding question. And all outstanding questions, I normally give it to all my fellow panelists to respond to. Sir, I want to tell you, this was an outstanding question.
All right.
I think the focus, as I see, is on a couple of things. First is certainly creation of jobs and making sure that there is the gap that we have between the provider of those jobs and the people who are skilled to do that. There must be a medium that connects the two. And today, with the best of efforts, we don't have a connector. Or connectors have got to be stronger. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, one last question from the audience. Okay, I guess we don't have any more questions from
Probably
the
with the
audience.
topic, we could ask a millennial to ask a question if there are
Any millennials here?
There's one hand up.
There's one there. Okay. Can you please introduce yourself and keep your question really brief?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Omkar, and I'm a millennial, and I'm a professor as well, so that makes a weird combination. My question is that, deploying, and I completely subscribe that all the millennials are looking for learning and development, but the way learning and development has actually been delivered, it's rather boring, and I can totally agree that, the 50 plus are the ones who are sitting on the computer and learning. We don't want to go ahead and sit on the computer and learn. Which other interactive places or initiatives one can think of to make sure that millennials are actively learning either about the product or the organization? So, yeah.
So I can take a stab at that. I think 2 things. One is organizations these days are moving towards augmented reality-based learning, right? So when a person comes, if you have to learn about the organization, you're actually not going through sitting and going through an onboarding session, but you're going through an augmented reality where you're experiencing something like virtual reality through which you're able to learn as well. Plus, augmented reality is also getting used in training, a salesperson, putting him in situations and how would he react in that situation. So it's actually an imaginary situation, but that's more intense than a classroom learning. That's one way we've seen learning is really changing. Second is wherein a person should be able to pick up anything across the globe and learn on his own without the organization giving him permission. So what I mean by that is, so if there are certain courses available anywhere, there are social platforms getting created right now where a person can go learn that without the organization having to subscribe for that social platform as well. That's the second kind of learning that we're seeing that are increasingly being picked up by millennials. But I think it's about what somebody wants to learn and how he wants to learn it from the individual. But these are 2 ways people are innovating in the areas of learning.
Sure, Prakash. To add to that, let me give a very different side of the spectrum. Well, at one end we are doing what Prakash is saying, but for example, there are a lot of people who come us, and I'm from the farm equipment sector, who have never been to a farm in their life. So what you instantly do is send these people for a couple of days to immerse themselves with the life of a farmer, be in the cycle of the cropping, and learn with that experience. So at one end, yes, there is an augmented reality. The other one is actually hands-on spending time with the customers. So you have both the spectrums happening. And most of the millennials actually love the time that they spend at the villages.
Okay. All right. So very quickly, closing comments. What would be the workplace of the future? That's what we started with. Any one skill set or any one trait that you see would be very important for employees, future employees, joining the workforce who are, or people who are already in the workforce to have to succeed in the new workplace? Just one skill set.
So I would think empathy and being sensitive.
Empathy and?
Being sensitive.
Being sensitive. Okay. Raj?
I would say learning agility, learning how to learn, because learning, instead of taking time out to learn, you are going to learn all the time, and that's how the organization is also going to remain agile.
Okay, learning how to learn.
Yeah, I think it's more about empathy and relating to people, connecting out with on a one-on-one basis.
Okay. Mr. Nathan?
Openness and listening.
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 Okay. All right.
To me, there are two things here. One is being a creative, adaptive problem solver, and the second is humility.
Sorry?
Humility. Second being humility.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll say the future of work is not going to be, you're not going to be employees anymore. You'll be contracted to do a work. You might work just 10 hours in a week. That's how I see the future changing. Second thing is to adapt to that. People would have to have the ability to reskill themselves. Reskill as quickly as possible and learn new things. That's how you'll be able to stay relevant in the new age.
Okay. A very challenging picture for dinosaurs like me, for sure. So thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think I've learned a lot through this. Thank you.